Huh?
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, featuring your hosts, Taylor Field and Reuben Olson.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am one of your hosts, Taylor Field.
And I'm your other host, Reuben Olson.
Yes, and we got some awesome content to talk about today. But before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us CryptidClues.ca. You can also send us an email, CryptidClues@gmail.com, if you want to say hello or just say hi, or if any stories you want to share with us. We're open ears. Additionally, you can also find us on social media, on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and we're also on Patreon. We can get ad-free early episodes. So, Reuben, what are we talking about today?
Well, today marks a special day. We're finally tackling one of the bigger topics in cryptid discussions. We're going to be talking about the Dogman. And the Dogman is quite the enigma. Not as well known as Bigfoot or his lesser cousins. Not even as well known, I'd say, as the Loch Ness Monster. However, once you explore the sheer amount of sightings and reports of Dogman, I'd say this is like the top tier second rank cryptid alongside the Sasquatch species. Think of all the different cryptids out there. When it comes to what you and I know versus maybe what some of our listeners know, because we're going to be introducing them to Dogman in this episode, Sasquatch is probably the most believable of the cryptid universe. And then probably the most popular after that, I'd say, is like the Loch Ness Monster or something, which is why I brought it up. You generally don't hear about Dogman from the public.
No, you don't. Most people, I mean, they think, well, werewolf, that sort of stuff. But when people hear the term Dogman, it's like, what? What are you talking about? That
Exactly.
Can't be real.
Yeah. And honestly, my first impression of the Dogman was immediate dismissal, because it was described to me as like a big, hairy, upright creature with the head of a dog. Like a man, but with a dog head. Easily, I thought it could be a mask, a misidentified Bigfoot, a plain old wolf peeking out of a bush or something, like Wile E. Coyote or something hunting some sheep, It kind of doesn't have that ring of mystery to it like Bigfoot does when it's brought up. It's not something that grips you. But take a second. Put yourself in the shoes of a child listening to a campfire story. Somebody in the circle talks about a werewolf, and suddenly we're on the right track with the Dogman vibe. That's what this creature essentially is. Not in the transforming, cursed human sense. It's definitely its own entity or species, but description-wise, this thing looks like a werewolf. A muscular, crazy dog body with the backwards bent legs, long, lanky arms with sharp claws, a snout, pointy ears, and soul-piercing red eyes. It's got a demonic intent and seemingly able to communicate with its stare. Witnesses describe the smile of the Dogman as something that sparks emotional PTSD flashbacks to their encounter, often reported as maybe chasing cars driving through the sighting hotspots. These things are intelligent and quick. They'll run alongside a car, reach out and jiggle the door handles and try to grab the person running away. When the person looks over at the monster, it's grinning, teeth bared right back at them. And not like an open mouth, like chimpanzee smile that you hear about, but like an honest, happy expression that this thing is so close to making human contact. That is incredibly creepy.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. I've read so many encounters where cars are associated with these things. Like, they just appear, and it's the stare and the aftermath of that really resonates with people. It is an instilled fear and trauma that resonates with survivalists, or people that escape, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we're only going to get stories from people that escape. There's definitely a lot. I want to say that this cryptid in particular mostly chases people away, but we'll never truly know because anyone that it's gotten, well, they can't tell us a tale, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hunters have witnessed these things, walking around together with Sasquatch, targeting camps and other hunters in their group. Witnesses report their face to face encounters with moments of sheer panic when these dogmen, get close, only to be penetrated mentally by piercing words in a loud, deep voice, speaking to them with intent to communicate. The dogman is not a cryptid to be taken lightly. Like, you've heard stories and stuff. If you can habituate a Bigfoot or chance upon a friendly, peaceful family of Sasquatch, you can almost certainly bet that any encounter with a dogman is going to end with you feeling like this is the end and you need to escape. Every single report, witness encounter, they all describe dogmen in this manner where it is terrifying. One encounter describes a habituated Bigfoot family protecting a farmland couple from attacking dogmen. Absolutely wild stuff. But the fact of the matter is that these stories aren't sparse. These encounters and tales are widespread and dismissed like tabloid articles at a grocery checkout. But the witnesses swear by their stories, and they far outnumber any cryptid other than the Sasquatch or the Yeti. There are more tales of dogmen than there are of some of the minor Sasquatch species like Orang Pendek, an easily believable cryptid. When I'm thinking of Bigfoot or Sasquatch or something, Taylor, I think, well, okay, I believe in Bigfoot. So obviously there are some subspecies, there are some little differences around the world because it's so widespread. Yeti, okay, that's totally fine. It could just be just Bigfoot, but described in a different spot. Orang Pendek, okay, it's a smaller Bigfoot. It goes to show that there's probably some size differences and stuff around the globe. There's lots of evidence for those things, right? But the amount of stories of dogmen in comparison to like Sasquatch subspecies, it's quite phenomenal. This isn't no like Loch Ness monster. This is a bona fide creature that, if you believe in Bigfoot, could easily be next on your list to be out there. Do you have any thoughts on any of that so far, Taylor? I know I've kind of led our listeners down this introductory path here, and that's about half of it, I would say. I've still got a little bit more, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on the dogman matter, just from your own mind right now.
Well, initially, I had never heard of dogman before. Like, it was always Bigfoot, and then finally, when this cryptid came to my radar, it seemed it had this unique kind of aesthetic and vibe to it. Like I was skeptical and suspicious, but once you start doing the research and once you start looking into this thing, then it starts to become something else entirely. There are, as you said, lots of sightings, lots of people seeing this, sticking to it, their stories. Some accounts just don't come across as being misidentification when how they detail these things. It clearly is a representation of something that is not, a normal bear or a normal coyote wandering around out in the backyard. So there's so many communities that have associations with these things, and it's just next to normal for them. And a lot of people know to keep these things bundled up because of ridicule. And that's such a shame, because then we lose out on so many other opportunities to hear real, actual encounters with dogman and that sort of stuff. And I think that's where you have to look in certain parts of the world, particularly the United States. I think they kind of lead the charge as far as dogman stuff kind of goes. I since we started this podcast, I've dived much more into dogman and everything, and I've found that there are some reports of it being, Germany. We've talked about that before in certain locations in Europe, but prominently North America, which is terrifying because we live in North America.
Yeah.
I don't want to come across one of these things.
Neither do I. I've always wanted to maybe see a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. That's my ultimate goal as an enthusiast, with what little cryptozoologist credentials I have, which are none, I want to see a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. But because I know that Dogman is so closely related to this thing in terms of territory and hotspots, I'm almost scared to go out in the woods looking for a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch sighting, only to encounter a Dogman.
It's worth noting too. I think if you encounter one or the other, me personally that would be all the justification I need to know to believe that the latter exists without having seen it. If I see the other, if that makes any sense. Like if I see a Dogman, I'm gonna be like, okay, Bigfoot's 100% real, and vice versa.
Yeah. I would say that's definitely that. If Dogman is, you see a Dogman first, Bigfoot's real. I would say if I saw a Bigfoot, I'd still be a little up in the air over Dogman. I'd really have to see one to believe one. I say this as a believer already, like I'm pretty sure they're out there, but there is that skeptic in me that just, I'm not 100% sure. But I would definitely rather see a Bigfoot. I feel like as far as encounters and sightings go, based off witness reports, everything that we've come to learn, if you're going to see a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, you are far more likely to see it from a distance, far more likely to get away unscathed. You might have like rocks or something thrown at you, but unless you do something to upset or anger it, you're probably going to make it home all right. If you're out in the woods, you're trying to communicate with a Bigfoot, you're going looking for trouble, okay, a little bit less likely. You might have a bad encounter with one of these things. But still, the fact remains that there are so many Bigfoot and Sasquatch sightings that are reported by people. There are habituated Bigfoot stories where people are feeding and trading them food and stuff on their porch, just, oh, there's some Bigfoot around, whatever. Oh, I recorded some Bigfoot out in my backyard. I just leave them treats and they come up close to the house. There are so many of those stories that it gives me hope. Especially even if you dive into the crazier aspects of it, where now we have Bigfoot or Sasquatch sightings where people have a differentiation between, oh, this is the Sasquatch family with red eyes. You avoid these ones because they are very terrifying. These are the Bigfoot or Sasquatch that just have inky black, dark eyes. They're much friendlier. They're willing to, interact with you and protect you or separate you from these other families. Okay, that's a little hard to believe as somebody that's never been there, but if you take all of it into account, there's all these different types. You can go have a nice encounter with Bigfoot. A Dogman, though, every single encounter, it is evil, it has red eyes, it is out to get you, it is chasing you away, it wants nothing to do with you. If it is around a Bigfoot, interestingly enough, it's around those red-eyed Bigfoots. I have yet to find a Bigfoot Dogman story where they do not describe the Bigfoot as being inherently evil as well.
Yeah, I think you make a great point about the context of the difference between the two and how you would encounter it. So just to kind of piggyback on that, when you look at Dogman encounters, yes, they're aggressive. They're always obviously trying to get somewhere. When you learn in your encounter of the Dogman within your proximity, it's usually from a perspective of maybe you're being hunted and it clicks what's going on, that you are being stalked. And then when you look at Bigfoot, there are some instances, okay, like the encounter stems from you're minding your own business, some rocks maybe thrown your way, and then you happen to see it step off the trail, and then there you go. But a lot of the encounters are by accident. There are people in tree stands that look down and like, holy shit, it's right below me. There are people that are going out hiking and then they happen to look out onto the creek side out in the distance. There it is, drinking out of the side of the ravine. Like, it's so many accidental sightings, whereas with Dogman, it's intent and it's aggressive.
There was one sighting I remember reading about for Dogman 2, or maybe I was listening to it. It was probably from another podcast. Somebody was out in their car with their couple and a Dogman came chasing some deer or something, and it snarled at them and they freaked out and ran away. It was a very terrifying encounter from what I remember of the description. But again, it was something that I don't think the Dogman knew they were there. I don't think the person knew the Dogman was there. They just heard something and it was a chance encounter, and then they were very clearly told by this creature to leave, get out,
Yeah.
I think it's about time for us to take a quick ad break, and then when we come back, we'll maybe look at a little bit more relevance about history and some stuff for this creature. But I have a few more thoughts to wrap us up with before I just pass it over to you, though. So stay on the line, listeners. We'll be back in 2 shakes. And we're back. That was our least intrusive ad break
That was
ever.
good. Nice and subtle.
Least intrusive of all time. I'm sure, listeners will be happy about that one. Maybe worth a little bit more than a 1-star review. I'm looking at you, whoever did that. So let's talk about the relevance of these creatures throughout history. Whether it's like Anubis from Egyptian history or literally like werewolves from the European Middle Ages, entities that mimic what we know as dogmen existed back as far as we can go, all the way up to today. Just like Bigfoot, just like Sasquatch. I'm going to keep making that comparison because as far as cryptids go, that's where I can hammer it home. When a creature is deeply rooted in history and described around the world, that's where it becomes believable to me without having seen one. I am more likely to accept its existence when hundreds of thousands of people have described this thing throughout the ages. Not just reports today, but sightings in history, everything from before. So what could dogmen be, though? Like, there's certainly not a ton of physical evidence for its existence. Is it just an animal with a low population hiding out deep in the woods in Bigfoot territory? Is it a spiritual group of beings or something demonic that takes form and prowls the earth hunting people? Dogman is something. And whether it's grossly misidentified or not, there's just too much to dive into without opening up a rabbit hole of reports, conspiracies, and theories. Dogman is something that gets to be described in the same depth and way we talk about Sasquatch. We can trace its origins back to multiple things. We can talk about reports that describe it similarly enough to be one thing, but with those little differences and nuances that leave our minds open to individual interpretation. Or we can blame it on demons, for instance, and have an answer that leaves it at blaming spirits, which of course begs the mind to be open and believe in the existence of spiritual entities, whether from religion or anything else. There's so many ways to tackle the subject of dogmen and describe it. The important thing is to know that it's there. Dogmen came to be known to modern civilization with the breakout of reports from Michigan, creating the Michigan dogman monster. Similarly, we have reports of the Beast of Bray Road, the exact same type of creature, in a different location. Perhaps with this lesser known sightings of dogmen were brought to light. Certain researchers have published compilations and books about the creature, from the ordinary to the fascinating. There are even reports that pretty much describe the classic werewolf, where someone transforms or is taken over by the presence of this beast. I can recall a quick little bit here where I was reading about just a couple of kids, they're out playing in a car parking lot, like an underground car parking lot, and the sewer manhole opens up, and this guy comes out and turns into like a werewolf dogman-like creature, and it's a freaky encounter. But when those kids grew up and they escaped from this, when those kids grew up, the one girl thought, okay, I was just a little kid, I was probably hallucinating, I was seeing things. Her brother was like, no, that was real. I have the exact same memory. I don't want to talk about it. Please, let's not talk about it.
I think that's such a valuable thing. Again, not to interject, but just having the extra person with you when you experience something, it reaffirms what you saw.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, when it comes to these reports and stuff, there is a lot to dive into in the future. So for now, we'll leave our listeners with a little bit of history and encounters to wrap things up. Everyone, thank you so far for listening to the introduction of Dogmen. Enjoy our discussion after the tales as we wrap things up. Taylor, I'm going to pass the buck to you. You dive into whatever Dogman topic you want, and we'll kind of just go from there.
Well, yeah, I mean, you said some great things about the history there, and I tried pronouncing this off air. I'm going to pronounce it again. Cyanocephaly. Now, this is something that you had mentioned, that this thing popped out of the ground and then turned and like transformed. That is very similar to the Cyanocephaly sightings and encounters. Because
Yeah.
these beings...
Sorry, we were joking before we started that we got the pronunciation down, and when it came down to saying it, neither of us were going to get it right.
No, it's a tricky word. I took some notes down on what the characteristics of a cyanocephaly is, or cyanocephalus. Cyanocephalus is so much easier to say. I'm going to say that.
Okay.
It's having the head of a dog or of a jackal. The literal meaning of cyanocephaly is dog-headed. However, this refers to a human body with a dog head. Cyanocephalics are known in mythology and legend from many parts of the world. Again, this covers ancient Egypt, India, Greece, and China. Further mentions come from medieval East and Europe. This is all backing the stuff that you were just saying, which is great. So, Cyanocephalus was familiar to the ancient Greeks, and that's obviously with representations of Egyptian gods. We have Duametif, son of Horus, Wepwe, the opener of ways, and Anubis, the Egyptian god of the dead. And if you look at hieroglyphics and designs of these three individuals, sure enough, they're dogmen, ancient dogmen. Again, reports of dog-headed races can also be traced back to Greek antiquity. In the 5th century, for the Greek physician, this is quite a name, Tisias. Starts with a C and a T, and I've never learned how to pronounce that in school, I can tell you that. Tisias, in his Indica, wrote a detailed report on the existence of cyanocephaly in India. And if we piece together this in the blog, I found some very cool original just paintings and everything that kind of associated with this. But Tisias of Snidus.
Yeah, I'm enjoying just listening to you pronounce these things.
This is so nuts. A Greek geographer and doctor who worked out of Persia wrote the following, and I quote, "On these mountains in India, there live men with the head of a dog, whose clothing is the skin of wild beasts. They speak no language, but bark like dogs, and in this manner make themselves understood by each other. Their teeth are larger than those of dogs, their nails like these of animals, but longer and rounder. They inhabit the mountains as far as the river Indus. Their complexion is swarthy. They are extremely just. Like the rest of the Indians with whom they associate, they understand the Indian language, but are unable to converse, only barking or making signs with their hands and fingers by way of reply. Like the deaf and dumb, they are called by the Indians Calistri, in Greek cyanocephaly, dog heads. They live on raw meat. They number about 120,000. End quote.
That is interesting. That is like just so stated as matter of factly, you know?
Yes, there is a lot more. There's a few other portions to that, but that was like the most prominent one I wanted to just kind of hone in on. So, cultural legends originally said that the Cyanocephaly resided somewhere in the wildlands west of Tibet and north of Persia, which is modern-day Iran. The European legends later began placing the Cyanocephaly in all these unexplored regions. And in Europe, they were described as dog-headed people, sometimes as dog-headed hairy giants that, again, have something kind of in common with hairy humanoids. Now, if we look at legends from India and China, the Cyanocephaly were described as shapeshifters who could change from human to dog. But they always retained some animalistic features when they became human again. So
That's interesting. Like a lot of this stuff too really sparks the original idea for a werewolf.
yes.
Because it had to come from somewhere, and people are creative, very creative. I know that when you look at hieroglyphs or something, any of the Egyptian stuff like Anubis, you could say, well, they were clearly inspired. They came up with it on their own. They decided to describe it this way, and they drew it that way, but it never really existed. Well, yeah, that's a definite possibility. But it could also come, and it could also stem from something that did exist. Whether Anubis was a physically present being or not, whether Anubis was a dog-headed man or not, it came from something, and both possibilities kind of exist at the same time, like a Schrodinger's box theory, right?
Yeah.
I think with the whole werewolf thing, it's so much more fun to believe that they were real, that it stemmed from something. And maybe some of the Middle European knights got it kind of wrong. Maybe it wasn't a curse or something like that that could infect people. But maybe there were some weird shapeshifters just in hiding with animalistic features that would transform at night. And thus the werewolf was born.
It doesn't take a lot to kind of spin a tale back in the day either. I mean, you're talking about a time when magic was very much the norm over science. And you're dealing with things that people can't explain. I mean, we see it in movies and representations all throughout society now, and we can kind of chuckle about it and enjoy it as entertainment, but it doesn't dismiss the fact that back then, knights and people of the age probably saw a lot of these things, documented it, and to them and majority of the populace, it was probably a very prominent, believable thing. Like I mentioned earlier, you have communities here that's just the norm for them. Well, that's probably on a much more global scale the norm back then.
Well, and think about how they would have had to share these tales as well. It's not like they had TV or news platforms where it would escalate and go everywhere. If you had a werewolf encounter in the Middle Ages, you shared that story. It was something that, let's say it was something terrible that would happen. That news would travel and it would be told word of mouth and it would change a little bit. But that's the only way it's going to spread. And with enough of these encounters, if it kept happening, you kept having werewolf encounters and reports coming from different places, it would become known by the general population.
Absolutely. Continuing on the cyanocephaly topic, there was an individual called Saint Christopher. He's a saint in various Christian religious traditions. Have you heard of this individual?
I have not.
So he was known to have carried Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. He was also considered to be a cyanocephalus, dog-headed. I was very intrigued by this because I didn't realize that a dogman had apparently carried Jesus Christ, but this is something that I'd found. And there was even some artwork, some old paintings, I guess, of Saint Christopher that you can find on Google. But this is something that's hardly ever talked about. I'm pretty confident that Dogman has a lot more reference, biblically, but I wasn't able to pull much at the at the time I was looking at it. But I found this, and I thought, okay, this is like extremely, extremely crazy. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, because
I mean, my thoughts as somebody who is more so Protestant than Catholic or anything, this is definitely a Catholic thing. Saint Christopher, I'm just looking him up right now. It's very interesting that he's depicted with the head of a dog. It looks like that's his depictions in art, usually depicted as a giant with a child on his shoulder and the staff in one hand. Some draw him as like a person with a dog head. That's something I'd have to look into a little bit more to kind of figure out my thoughts on it. As a Protestant, I kind of just look at my beliefs stem from one book, not from anything else or any other tales besides, crazy Bigfoot stuff and aliens. Mm-hmm. I like being a psychopath that way.
Fair enough.
Something I'll have to research.
So, again, these dog-headed beings, they are traced back to Egyptian times, even prominently hundreds of years, before Christ, as well as becoming prominent in the 5th century. And then again, in today's day and age, this last century, we've seen an uptick in sightings. More people going off the beaten trail to areas that other people haven't really gone to, and they are starting to see things. And it's not, again, only Bigfoot or other little people like elves, fairies, gnomes, or anything like that. They're finding dogman out there. Pennsylvania, particularly, is a prominent amount of dogman sightings. Some accounts actually date back as early as the 1960s in the state. Most of those reported...
Before we dive into that, I feel like it's time to disappoint our viewers with another ad break. And welcome back, everybody. We thought we hit you so nicely with the first one, we'd be a little bit mean with the second. Taylor, I am sorry to interrupt you.
No,
Carry on there.
I'm glad you keep me on track. You're watching out for me there. Most of these reported sightings, again, estimated a dogman to be about 7 feet tall when standing or walking on its hind legs, 3 or 4 feet at the shoulder when on all fours. It's described as being very muscular, weighing at about 400, 500 pounds, and some reports portray it as entirely covered by hair, while others claim it to be more of like man's body, kind of hairless with the head of a wolf. And like we talked about earlier, it's usually reported to be much more aggressive than other cryptids, often confronting the humans that encounter it. And on that note of encounters, I have a couple here that I'm going to kind of dig into.
Okay. I'm excited for this. I haven't heard these.
So there was one that happened with Australia, and this is what I really wanted to talk about at one point, because he was on the individual spoke on the podcast Paranormal and UFO podcast, so definitely go check them out. And I'm just gonna kind of like plug them and just kind of like reference this sighting a little bit from what the article had listed out. So it was a fisherman. This guy basically claims that he was just absolutely terrified. It kind of stuck with him. Again, we talked about the PTSD. Well over a month, he was kind of in fear of what had happened. Mm-hmm. So he disclosed that it was a half dog, half human-like creature that had come at him, basically. And he thought he was going to be killed. He was totally terrified, but he was out fishing in his kayak. And it was like near the end of the year. And again, Australia is a lot more warmer, than it is in Canada. So this is when the first incident had happened for him. He noticed that every time he started to like paddle through with his kayak, he realized something was taking a step alongside it to hide its steps in the noise. When he would stop, he didn't hear anything, and then he started paddling more again, and then he could hear it in the bush. So he realized...
That's such a scary common cryptid tactic too, like Bigfoot, Dogman, everything. It's always taking a step when you take a step, or when you make a sound, it makes a sound, and then it just stops. It's so spooky.
This is not the first time I've heard people disclose them being stalked like this. When they move, it moves. And that gives me the absolute heebie-jeebies, because you're dealing with something that's super intelligent to be able to kind of rationalize this kind of hunting tactic. But anyways, so he's freaked out and he starts to take off, but he managed to actually get a photo of it, and I've seen the photo, and it looks like a dog looking like thing that's kind of, popping up there. You can find it too if you Google just Australian Dogman encounter. You'll find it, and you can just kind of see the imagery there.
I'm just gonna look it up right now while you talk.
But he couldn't go back to the area. He refused to for a while, and he just woke up with night terrors, having dreams about this thing. And people that he started to talk to were just like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a Dogman," and that's basically it for that. I again, like I said, these things, they're intelligent and they track and they trek, and it is absolutely terrifying that they stalk. Mm-hmm. And this won't be the only encounter that you hear where that happens, because there are other ones. You got the photo there?
Dogman pictures are always so creepy.
Yeah.
Even if it's like, some of these are, you look at it and you go, well, come on, it's a picture of a bunch of trees. That could be the tree branch and some logs, whatever. If you look at it closely, you can kind of make out what's there, and just that thought alone that it could be something is really creepy.
Yeah. It's a very disconcerting feeling that kind of generates in the pit of your stomach.
Yeah.
So I have another one here, and it's interesting, like a really old newspaper article I had found. And I quote, "Some people here are jokingly referring to it as the case of the werewolf, but police are serious about it. 3 persons have told police that they saw a large beast that resembles a werewolf lurking along railroad tracks near downtown in the last week. In each case, he was spotted during the early morning hours, and one man, a train crewman switching trains, said that he was approached from behind and was struck on the shoulder with a piece of 2x4 lumber when he ran oh my gosh, it's such tiny font. But when he ran, the werewolf also disappeared into some nearby brush. In the other reported incidents, the werewolf was seen by another train crewman about 3 a.m. Police say the third report came from a motorist who said it ran in front of his car about 4 a.m. and then quickly disappeared. We don't know what to do. We don't know what to think, the police chief said. We didn't release it to the news media when we got the first report about a week ago, but now we're taking it seriously and we're concerned for the safety of our people. The descriptions of the werewolf given by the three persons to police, they're not giving their names. They spotted him or similar, but even in each case, the description is vague. Very hairy is the first description given by each person who saw the werewolf. The chief said that he thinks that a person is wearing some disguise, such as a mask, but there's a lot of natural hair. I'm inclined to think it might be a local person. None at the other area towns have had anything like this, and in each case, has been seen in the same part of our town.
See, that's the creepy thing, is whether or not it's the Dogman, there could still be some creepy psycho killer wearing like a dog mask or something, or even, bear with me here, a literal dog head if they're that crazy. And that alone is horrifying.
It is. I mean, it's worth noting, they also say here in the follow-up that it ranges from 7 to 9 feet tall.
Yeah.
It's the tall factor that gets me when you see those like bent backward legs too. Ugh.
Oh.
I have one more encounter I'm going to share. I'm just going to kind of like loosely paraphrase a little bit because this is one that we actually did on our show. There's a lady that came on one of our first encounters episodes of Cryptid Clues. You can find it earlier on in the feed where she tells this story. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate it and shed some light more on it because it's a fascinating account. And I was really, really happy to have her join the show and just kind of share it. And she was an extremely nice lady. But it involves a family member of hers. Basically, her grandfather and grandmother had bought their first family homestead. They had heard about there were certain parts, in their like nearby. Again, this is in the United States. Certain areas nearby that had some cryptid kind of activity. Again, this is a long time ago. So about 2 months into them living there, they had started to see some cool wildlife, like some bears and stuff like that, and that kind of set the precedence for what they were anticipating was at their door. So something was pounding on the front of the house, pounding on the door, scratching at it, trying to get in. And this lady's grandfather assumed, okay, it's probably the bears trying to just get in the house, whatever. He grabbed his shotgun before going to the door. He tried to look out the front windows to see if he could catch any kind of glimpse of what was going on, but all he could see was like a big black shadow being cast on the porch. He is a World War II vet, and he just thought, okay, what the heck? He unlocks the door and he swings it open, expecting to see, a bear or a person standing there. What does he see? He sees a 6.5 to 7 feet tall, hunched over, full head of a dog, black body covered in black hair that just reeked and smelled like wet dog and raw sewage, just standing there. It had the ears and everything. As he says, it looked like a German shepherd's that had been placed on this large human-shaped body. Mm-hmm. The thing was, though, this thing looked at him and actually, he says, it cocked its head sideways and looked down at him as if it was kind of confused as to oh, someone's in this house. He immediately pulled his gun up and he was going to pull his trigger, but the thing took off. He got a shot off right in its right calf muscle, he says. And he says, again, the howl that came out of it was just, it scared him to death. He ran back inside, bolted the door, and he stood there. And all he could hear outside was this thing howling and howling as it went deeper into the forest.
That's so creepy.
Yes. he swore on the fact that he could hear like some nights this thing like start pounding up on the porch, and it sounded like something with a limp like dragging a part of itself, which terrified him, thinking, okay, this thing's coming back, it wants to come at me. But again, if you want to go listen to our first encounters episode on our podcast feed, the lady, she tells a story there, and we kind of go a lot more in depth to it. It's a great time. But for reference, I just wanted to bring it and use it in an introduction episode here because it's a fascinating encounter. It truly is.
Yeah, no, definitely go give that a listen, folks, if you want to hear a little bit more about the Dogman. Definitely look up online if you're curious right now. We're going to dive back into this topic in the future. There's lots of ground to cover when it comes to Dogman stuff. Lots of different theories, lots of possibilities, lots of creepy, spooky stories. Like, this is the classic, almost like that campfire feeling when you're sharing spooky stories back and forth. You don't so much get that with Bigfoot all the time. You get it every single shot with Dogman.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as we kind of like close out here this episode, at least this introduction episode of Dogman, I'm curious, Reuben. So, at its core, it's just this stage of the game and the discussion. For you, is Dogman something that is demonic? Is it spiritual? Is it just a animal, or is it some kind of lost species that's related to some Egyptian form or branch? Who knows?
See, with the things we've covered so far in this introduction episode, if I was on the viewer's side of things right now, if I was listening to this podcast, if this is my first experience hearing about Dogman, I would assume that it's some kind of an animal, it's some kind of lost thing, if it exists. And I'm not convinced. I'm not going to say it's out there. My side of it is, well, I obviously know more than what we're getting at here. I think Dogman is real. I think it's a real cryptid. I think it's out there. I think there's some weird things going on. A lot of the encounters and stuff I've read lead me to believe there's something evil about it. It could very well be demonic. I don't think it's a natural animal. I think if it is a physical entity, it didn't come about by natural means.
So it was it had a helping hand in how it is been placed here.
Either that or spiritual things, yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's my conclusion. But I'm still open to my own research. I'm still looking things up constantly about Dogman because it's the second most thing, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Dogman.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm inclined to agree. I can't confirm where I stand with it, what I really think it is, because it's dominant in so much of our history, like we discussed earlier. It's got credible backing to be at least parallel to humanity for this whole time, where you think, okay, there's got to be something more to going on here, like some kind of credibility to this cryptid. And it's got prominent sightings nowadays, which makes me really wonder what's going on. So
yeah, well, that encounter that you brought up at the end there from our previous encounters episode, that's the kind of thing that sticks with you forever.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done a few other episodes, some campfire clues, where I talk about Dogman and stuff like that, and people finding just certain evidence about Dogman, like some old photographs and stuff like that, and talking us about it. But I think I've said this many times, I think there's a network of underground tunnels beneath us, and you got Bigfoot and you got Dogman that are using them as underground highways. I really, really just feel like there's a lot we just don't know going on below us. And
there could be something beneath you right now.
Yeah, I hope not, but you never know.
All right, I think that's a good place to leave it. Look below you, folks.
Well, plugs, I said at the beginning, but I'm going to say them again. And I also want to say just a thank you, because I've noticed there's been an uptick on our viewership and an uptick on subscribers. And if you are one of such individuals, thank you very much. It goes a long way, and we take notice to it. It is just fantastic.
We talk about it all the time, from the good to the bad.
Yes. And if you also want to send us an email, just say hi. You can send us an email. CryptidClues@gmail.com. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca. You can find us all over our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and on the Patreon. Shout out to you, Kapruka. You're an amazing patron. That's it.
Alrighty, Taylor. I think that's everything. I think we've covered everything for our introduction episode. So join us next time when we get to a part 2, when we get to whatever else we want to talk to about Dogman. We'll let you know. We'll probably talk about some other cryptids in the next episode, but we'll come back to this topic on and off, I think. Mm-hmm. This is going to be a big one.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to tonight's episode. Sorry, I flubbed that line a little bit there. I'm a little bit tired. It's supper time for me, so I'm going to go eat. Let our viewers get back to whatever they're going to be doing. Taylor, thank you so much.
Thank you, Reuben. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.